I think it's like a critique of social hierarchy, and it's inviting people to decondition the parts of themselves that just perform hierarchy without ever asking, but why? Why do you do that? Because you're meant to, or because it's actually what you want? Is it really your deepest conviction that your spouse should be the most important person in your life and have privileges above others? Or is it simply the script that you were handed by the society that you live in?
Welcome to All the Love, the podcast where we deep dive into all things queer and non-monogamous relationships.
We're Ian Rowe, longtime practitioners in coaching, therapy, and education, with a focus on supporting humans in said relationships.
Every quarter, we pick a theme and host a series of live podcast recordings.
And here's one we made earlier.
Hope that it speaks to you.
All the love.
From E, that's me.
And Ro, that's me. Okay, cute.
Introductions. Ro, would you like to go first?
Sure. My name is Ro Moed. I am a writer, I'm a coach, and I'm a trainee therapist in advanced training in transactional analysis psychotherapy. I am in private practice as a therapist, and I'm also running a practice as a relationship coach, specializing in romantic relationships, or any type of relationship can come up, but specializing particularly in polyamorous and relationship anarchist relationships. And I write about those topics quite a lot online. I write about my perspective on how to build a healthy, thriving connection with another person or multiple people. I write about developing a healthy connection to yourself, because that's an area of interest too. I think that our relationship to ourselves is really important. So when I talk about relationships, I don't just mean romantic and sexual ones. I mean the one to ourselves and the ones, like all the relationships that we can have in our lives. I think that about covers like the basics to do with me. You go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, so hello, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Cunningham. I've been working in gender, sexuality, and relationships since 2008. I have degrees in political science and women, gender, and sexuality studies. I worked at a domestic violence center for 3 years, and then I pivoted to more prevention work, helping people get into healthy relationships rather than helping people get out of abusive ones. I chose transformational life coaching as the modality to do that because it's just been a modality that's been very helpful for me. Often healers and helpers choose the modality that works best for them to then study and go into and help other people with. And that was certainly true for myself. So I've been training as a coach since 2016. I have been running my own private practice since 2017. I work specifically with polyamorous and queer folks. I also identify as polyamorous and queer. I am the L in the alphabet mafia. For those of you who don't know, L stands for lesbian. I feel like this crew probably knows that L stands for lesbian.
I think you're lost if you don't know.
You might be in the wrong room if you don't know what the L in the alphabet mafia stands for. And yeah, I've been making content in this arena since 2019. So I've made podcasts, I have an Instagram, all of that jazz. And most recently, I've really dove into YouTube. So I have multiple YouTube channels because, why just have one? Boring, right? But I have a YouTube channel specifically for relationships, and I completely agree with Ro. It's not just about romantic and sexual relationships, and I think that's one of the reasons why Relationship Anarchy is such a draw for me, is because it's not just about romantic and sexual relationships. It's about all of our relationships, including our relationship to ourselves. And my other channels are dedicated to Love Mastery, which is the program that I've created because now I train and certify queer and polyamorous relationship coaches. And I also have a entrepreneurship channel because I help people grow their own small businesses or service-based practices, or specifically coaching practices as well. So that's a little bit about me. And without further ado, we will dive into today's topic. Ro.
Yes. So today's topic is find your core set of relationship values. So what I'll do is I'll start by reading the principle from the Relationship Anarchy Manifesto, and then we can dive into exploring it. Find your core set of relationship values. How do you wish to be treated by others? What are your basic boundaries and expectations on all relationships? What kind of people would you like to spend your life with? And how would you like your relationships to work? Find your core set of values and use it for all relationships. Don't make special rules and exceptions as a way to show people you love them for real, in inverted commas. It's a nice, pithy one compared to some of the others that we've looked at. It's nice and succinct. Yeah, what are your initial reactions to that, Elizabeth?
Well, the first couple things that pop into my head in this bullet point is talking about boundaries, because I think that boundaries is one of those kind of popular terms right now that gets misused a lot. And so just diving into a little bit more about what a boundary is. And I like to distinguish between boundaries, rules, expectations, and agreements, because I think, especially in non-monogamous relationships, is that those four terms can get a little bit muddy sometimes. So boundaries specifically are things that, ways in which to love you and what you will do or how you expect to be treated in relationships and what you will do if you don't get treated in a certain way, right? So as an example, if someone yells at you, a boundary would be like, hey, if you're going to raise your voice at me, then I'm actually going to remove myself from the situation. So a boundary has to do with what you want, what you need, and what you will do about that if that does not happen, right? Whereas a rule is imposing something on someone else. So same situation, it's like, if you yell at me, then you have to leave the room, right? So a rule is trying to control someone else's behavior. An expectation would be either explicit or implicit. So an explicit expectation would be, I expect you to speak calmly or to not raise your voice, even if we are in conflict. So that would be explicit, so you said it out loud. Implicit would be that you expect that in a relationship, but you don't say it out loud. And when that happens, then you get upset about it because it's an expectation that you have that was not met because someone is now yelling at you and you didn't expect that to happen. So then when we have those conversations with people and it's like, hey, we had this argument and you yelled at me. I kind of expected you to not yell at me, like kind of ever in this relationship. So that would be one way that you could approach that. Where an agreement would be between the two of you or multiple of you, however many is in the situation. So agreement is, we agree that if we are in conflict with one another, we're not going to raise our voice. We're not going to yell at each other. So that would be an agreement. Like everyone has explicitly said, yes, we agree that we are not going to do this thing. And of course, as human relationships go, then those things get muddied in the process. But if we can distinguish between those things, then we can also distinguish how we are going to proceed, with whatever is happening. So again, boundary being specifically about you. I am going to be treated in a certain way. This is how you can love me. If you are not going to love me in this way, these are the actions that I am going to take to ensure that I'm okay, right? There you go. That's my spiel about boundaries.
We say spiel so often for someone who's not Jewish, saying that as a Jewish person. I'm just like always like remarking on how often I hear you say spiel. I'm like, I don't notice any other non-Jewish people using Yiddish like you do. But anyway, you go. Maybe it's my influence on you over the years. So sorry,
Maybe, I don't know.
Picking up on one thing you said when you said so many brilliant things. I'm such a shit. So
I think that was it. And we got it. And we got to laugh. We got to laugh at it. So I think that was appropriate, you know?
Well, thanks. You're always nice to me. No, I think I agree with everything that you're saying. Yeah, a lot of people do say this is a boundary for me when it's actually more like a rule for the other person. It's an attempt to constrain the behavior of the other person, as opposed to saying this is what keeps me feeling well, and this is what I will and will not participate in, which just feels very different. I hope people can hear the difference in how that feels, how that sounds. I also think sometimes people get confused because boundaries can just be like, from the outside, very unreasonable, but that's still a boundary. Like, that person is allowed to have whatever boundary they want for their relationships. My only thought is that there will be consequences on their relationships if they hold that boundary. So someone might have a boundary of never ever criticize me in any way, ever. Even when I'm doing something wrong, you must always be on my side, which is kind of a rule of traditional relationships for some people, that, you know, you're always supposed to take the side of the person that you're dating. And while that may that be their boundary, and they're entitled to have that boundary and to say, if you criticize me, I'm not going to be in this relationship, that's going to have consequences for their self-awareness, for their personal growth. If the other person adheres to that boundary, it has consequences for them. They have to diminish themselves, and they have to take on behavior that might be hurting them or even harming them. So boundaries can be both healthy and unhealthy for the individual, for the relationship. That's also something I wanted to clarify. And I'd say that without judgment for the human being who does that, but I just, with a kind of caution that maybe it's going to have consequences on your relationship.
Right.
There was another word I wanted to define with you and get your take on it, because it's a really key word in this part of the manifesto, because I think it's in the beginning of it. Find your core set of relationship values. Values. What are values?
Values. Yes. Yeah.
But like, values, I would say, and you tell me your view, are the principles that guide how you relate. So they're like the position that you're coming from, the way you orient yourself in relationships. And that's why they can be applied to all kinds of relationships, not just romantic ones. And I think that's what this part of the manifesto is saying. Find out what your way of orienting yourself in relationships is, and act with integrity across all of your relationships. Don't privilege your romantic partners in ways that you don't privilege your friends, for example. So examples of values would be honesty, autonomy, generosity. Tenderness can come up as one. Accountability, freedom, reliability, humor can be one. Curiosity, creativity, sex, beauty. I mean, I'm just saying words now. But
those are great. I love all of these words, and they're definitely values for sure.
Yeah. Do you agree with that definition, or do you want to add anything or change anything?
No, I completely agree with that definition. And I just Googled it really quick, but it says personal values are deep-seated beliefs that guide behaviors, decisions, and life direction, acting as an internal compass for what is important. And I agree with that. And I also think, in the interest of talking about values inside of this context and like the self-growth aspect of relationships and not being too rigid, because that's what I heard when you were cautioning around boundaries, is not being willing to examine what your boundaries are, and therefore being too rigid and having consequences and impact on yourself and other people in your relationships. Also the same with values. I think, especially with the word like beliefs inside of there, like internal beliefs and a system that you live your life by. And I think that is important, obviously, or hopefully, obviously, by the end of this episode, it will be very clear that I think values are important, but not holding your values and your belief systems so rigidly that they can't be examined, or that they can't be questioned, or that, use them as a way to avoid accountability, right? Because that's something that can happen with that. So yeah, so I think values are important, and I agree with all of the values that you shared, all the words that you shared as well. What else is important about values? And again, inside of this like self-discovery, is that when you do have a value, really defining what that means for you. Like, for me, integrity is a huge value. But I know that my definition of integrity and how that guides my life might be different than someone else who uses the same word, integrity, but it occurs differently to them. Or even though we use the same word of integrity, in different scenarios, our personal integrity would dictate different actions, right? So just because we have same or similar values as other people doesn't mean that that we don't define it the same way, that we're not going to behave the same way. It doesn't mean that we're going to agree on everything. There are plenty of people who use the word integrity who I disagree with on most things. And so not just using these words, but being really clear about what your values mean to you, such that you can communicate that to the people you're in relationship with. And then you can, see where you agree, disagree, what works, what doesn't work in your relationships. I just think language can be so helpful, but it can also be used as like a defense mechanism as well, like a shield. And I would hope that in discovering what your values are, that you use them more as a bridge, or even like, okay, I'm gonna get really like, I'm a sunflower hippie girl, okay? But like, but using them more as like this beautiful meadow of just like, oh, this is what integrity is for me. And like, let's play in the meadow of integrity together. What does that look like? What can we do here? Right? Or if you don't like meadows, maybe you like, oceans or mountains or whatever, playgrounds, skate parks, whatever that is. But like, how are you exploring this, for yourself and with the people in your relationships and regardless of your relationship, right? Like you said, Ro, and like this bullet point points out, like not just romantically, not just sexually, but also with the people in your family, like your friends, even at work, like coworkers, or like how are you exploring that in different ways with the people in your life such that you are able to be self-expressed in that way.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying, as I often do. And I really wanted to like focus on what you said around values being flexible. I feel like that's really important, not just as a general point, but also as it relates to this principle in the manifesto.
Right.
Because people do tend to think that values are fixed. I just have this value. There's nothing I can do about it. The fact that I'm not going to give an example because I can't think of one off the top of my head, but the fact that I have this value is not something that can change. It's just who I am. But who you are changes over the course of your life. Like who I was 10 years ago is so different in some ways to who I am now. Fundamentally, I think I'm still a kind person. I think I always have been. I've had similar interests, but like I'm much more comfortable with more autonomy in my relationships now than I was when I was younger. And that's not to say that's a more evolved state of being, but it is a more fully expressed way for me to be. That is more who I am at my very core. Once you take away all the layers of bullshit that have, gathered over the years of life and trauma and difficulty and hard relationships and, things like that, the things that harden us, once you clear all of that away, at my very core, that's something that I am. And the conditioning part of it is what's really interesting to me. And I think it's what Relationship Anarchy is trying to challenge in this manifesto. The point that's trying to be made is that a lot of our values are absorbed from the culture that we exist within, absorbed not just from our culture, but from our family, from our religion. It might be a couple-centric value. It might be a scarcity-based value, trauma-shaped value, a value built around avoiding social disapproval. So finding your core set of values is not a simple task. It sounds, just figure out what you like, what matters to you. But how many of us actually have access to what truly matters to us because of how we've been conditioned? So for me, Relationship Anarchy is an invitation to examine ourselves in an interested and compassionate way, as opposed to with judgment, and say, what is it that I actually, once you remove all those layers, what is it that I actually am? What do I actually value?
Yeah, I agree with you as well.
Yeah.
Oh, can you imagine? And how do you examine yourself, right? So, some ways that you can do that are just think about what are some of the things that you value off the top of your head. Actually, when you were talking about values that have changed for you, one of the values that has changed for me is justice and the idea of what justice means. And I feel like I used to be a lot more rigid when it came to justice. Like I had a lot more hard opinions about what was right and what was wrong and what should and shouldn't be done and what people deserve and what they don't deserve, right? Like I had so much more harshness around that where I feel like that for me has softened a lot. I feel like I have a lot more empathy, a lot more understanding of nuance in different situations, not judging so quickly as I used to and like really getting curious about like, oh, what is going on here and why did this happen? Why do people do these things? Why did this person say this thing? Like having a lot more curiosity and compassion for people has changed my relationship with my value of justice. So that's an example of that. And where was I going with that? Oh, yeah, how to examine your values. So, thinking of what are some values that you have, and again, maybe that is joy, family, love, curiosity, compassion, peace. There's so many different values that you can have, but like, what are the things that come up for you? And then asking yourself questions inside of that, like, what does that mean for me? What does peace as a value mean for me? What am I actually talking about here? And one way to dive deeper into that is to be like, how does that look for me and my life? Like, if I were being peaceful, then what would I be doing? Or if my relationships were peaceful, then what would they look like? What expectations would I have? What would we be saying or doing or thinking? How would I feel? What emotions would come up for me? And so allowing yourself to like dig a little bit deeper into that. But then I think the other important question to ask is, why is that a value for me? Why is this important for me? How long has this been important for me? Where did this come from? Where did this value of peace come from? And, you might discover that, like, well, I have a value of peace because I grew up in a really tumultuous household. I'm making all of this up right now. But, like, maybe you have a value of peace because you grew up in a very tumultuous household. And so, actually, the reason why you value peace is because it was missing for you in your relationships when you were growing up, right? And so it's like, oh, interesting. And when that happens, when you have a value that's based off of a missing, that is something that is really important to dive deeper into because often what happens when there's a missing, right? Like in this case, tumultuous childhood, so therefore peace was missing. The reason we have that value is because we made the decision as a young person that something else would be better, even though we didn't really know what that was or what that meant, right? So now we have a value that's just based off of a traumatic experience or traumatic upbringing, which is, again, totally fine and normal. But asking yourself, like, well, what is actually important to me about that? Like, not just peace. Like, sure, peace would have been fine, but what was I really missing? Like, now looking back as an adult, what was I really missing there? Was it peace? Or was it love? Or was it compassion? Or was it understanding? Or was it being seen? Right? Like, because my household was so tumultuous, I was just never able to be seen as a person, as the individual that I was. And peace is actually not going to fix that. Peace is actually not the solution to that. You know, being seen, being understood, being curious about myself and others, that's actually what was missing, not peace. Right? So when we kind of do this deeper dive of examination of our values, then we can have a better understanding of ourselves, but then we can also have a better pathway to having parts of us experience the thing that we really want to, instead of what we kind of made up in a time of tumult and trauma.
Yeah, you could easily end up in situations where you're avoiding things that are healthy because you're coming from that place of lacking something and just flattening it into something that isn't actually accurate to your situation. So I think that's a really wise and important point, because something that comes up often, for example, is people who maybe they say they want peace, and how that is expressed is, I never want any sort of signs of anger from my partner. And it's important to remember that there is a difference between healthy anger and terrifying, abusive rage. And it is normal to express anger. It's normal to have disagreements, to rub up against each other. And, you know, if somebody decided that their partner was no good for them, or that a friend was no good for them, or they had to cut off a family member because they didn't have peace in that relationship, and the way they're defining peace is by saying we never get angry with each other, they're missing out on a whole side of relating that's really important and can be very healthy. And I think if you ask yourself, but why, enough times, you often get to the core of what's going on for you, but you have to be willing to go there.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think bringing it back to Relationship Anarchy specifically, some of you in the audience today, you might have been here for other recordings, so this will be repetitive for you, but it's worth saying again that Relationship Anarchy means that you are approaching relationships in a non-hierarchical way. Anarchy is the opposite of hierarchy. Hierarchy means you have a sacred ruler, one person is more important, you categorize relationships as more or less worth protecting, more legitimate, more serious, more entitled to shape your life. That would be a hierarchical approach to things. And Relationship Anarchy is about having non-hierarchy. And I think a lot of our values, when they are not interrogated, preserve hierarchy, because we've inherited our values from a society that promotes hierarchy and tells us that is the correct way to approach relationships. So I think that this part of the manifesto is not just offering relationship advice to people. I think it's like a critique of social hierarchy, and it's inviting people to decondition the parts of themselves that just perform hierarchy without ever asking, but why? Why do you do that? Because you're meant to, or because it's actually what you want? Is it really your deepest conviction that your spouse should be the most important person in your life and have privileges above others? Or is it simply the script that you were handed by the society that you live in? So yes, that's, you know, I think values are political as well as personal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just taking the first question, how do you wish to be treated by others? And then answering that question, and then doing just as you said, Ro, just doing the, but why? Why do you want to be treated that way? Okay, well, why is that? Okay, why is that? Okay, why is that? Like, you know, be that little 5-year-old to yourself. Why? But why? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know anything. Okay, child. But no, I think that is a really good exercise. Also, it does remind me, Ro, you made a piece of content. This was like years ago, but it just stuck out to me because it was so hilarious and cute. Because you did this, you made a piece of content that was like pretending to be someone asking questions and like saying things about, you know, monogamy or something like that. And you were just like, but why? But why? Why?
And in the end, the version, like the me that was playing the other person in the conversation, said, because that's just how things are done.
Right.
And then triumphantly, the first person is like, but why? Why haven't they done that way? So that's the point. It's like, let's get to the point where we say, I'm doing this because that's how it's done, and then throw that out the window and start from scratch with what we actually want. And it may actually end up looking a lot like what society tells us to do. That's a very different outcome to just following orders, you know?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. Like, I don't think that relationship anarchy is about upending everything and making it look the opposite of what it is now. I think that would be a disservice and not a great approach, but rather this inquiry of like, but why do we do that? I have a silly example that has nothing to do with relationships. Well, it has to do with the relationship with me, which we talked about that. Okay, there we go.
It's relevant. Yeah.
Relevant. Nailed it. But when I went to college, I was asking myself, like, why do I shave my legs? Like, I was just like, because I was told that's what you're supposed to do. And I was just like, oh, yeah, like I shave my legs because it was kind of a peer pressure thing when I was in middle school. It was like, oh, you don't shave your legs yet? And I was like, I don't, yeah, okay. And then I started shaving my legs. And yeah, so when I got to college, I was just like, why do I shave my legs? I was like, why do I do this? Like, is this something that I actually want to do? Because I didn't really actually choose to do this. It was a very peer pressured thing. And then I was like, no, I actually really like shaving my legs. I like the ritual of it. I like how my legs feel. A part of the ritual then is like putting either like oil or lotion on my legs, which I also really enjoy. I'm like, no, I actually like doing this, and then continued to do it. So, like, yes, it's still like something in society, like, quote unquote, women are supposed to have shaved legs. But after examining that for myself, and I could have chosen not to, I could have been like, you know what, I actually don't like doing this. This is not something I want to do. I'm going to stop doing it. But then it comes down to like, what am I choosing to do after examining something about what I was told to do or what I should do? Right.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's the same way in relationships too, where it's like after you examine something, then it could look similar to how it looked before because it actually is something that you want to do or you like doing or you and your partner or partners, agree is good for you too.
Yeah. Which is ultimately going to lead you to have relationships that truly satisfy you if you're examining things, even if you end up exactly where you started. At least I'm here because I want to be and not because someone told me to be. And that was a great example. Do you mind if we shift to a different part of this principle, or did you
Yeah.
have something else you were like dying to
No,
talk about?
I'm flowing with it.
Okay. Because I was thinking if we look at the part where it says, where is it? Find your core set of values and use it for all relationships. I think this is a part that can be easily misunderstood, so I think it would be worth looking into it. I don't think it means to make every relationship identical. It's not about having the same structure, the same time spent with each person, because I think that, relationships are necessarily going to look and feel different and you'll have different commitments to people. But for me, it's saying treat all relationships with equal dignity, and that the ethics you have, the way you orient yourself in the world, shouldn't become inconsistent depending on how like romantically significant a relationship is, or whether it's sexually charged or socially sanctioned or it's ego sustaining or whatever. Like, we shouldn't be treating people differently depending on those factors. We shouldn't be abandoning our values because we're afraid of losing this person because that relationship carries a lot of social prestige or whatever. So that's what it's saying for me. It's not anti-difference in relationships. Relationships can be structured differently, and that's a big part of relationship anarchy as well, as the customization of things. What it does for me is like it challenges unexamined privilege, and rather than insisting on sameness across all relationships. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. Yeah, from my point of view, let's say you have your top 3 values, and your top 3 values are love, respect, and honesty. And so using those top 3 values in all of your relationships, but then again with relationship anarchy, the customization of relationships with those values. So love, respect, and honesty is gonna look different with your coworkers than it does with a romantic partner, right? And then if you have multiple romantic partners, that's also going to look different with each, romantic partner. And, something that Ro and I have talked about in previous episodes is how our current relationships all look very different. First of all, I don't even have any romantic relationships right now. But I do have like very solid life partnerships. And given the values that I have and how I operate in the world, like I said, one of my top values is integrity. I also very much value freedom, love. So let's just pretend that those are my top values for today: love, integrity, and freedom. And so when I am operating in my different life partnerships, that doesn't look exactly the same. It's around, like, what works for the other person, what works for us together, how our lives look right now, what's important for us in our lives right now. So it looks on the surface, even though the values are the same and a lot of my thoughts are the same, it doesn't mean that on the surface it looks exactly the same given the relationships that I have.
And knowing you and the person that you are, I'm assuming that even though that's true, you don't like treat certain features of a relationship as like premium features that are only available to certain like high level members. So, even though everything that you said is true, there's still going to be fundamental care. There's going to be openness to repair with someone else when there's been a rupture. There's going to be basic communication and respect. This is what the Manifesto and Relationship Anarchy in general is inviting us to do, is to actually think of everyone in the world as deserving of those fundamental things. And, you might be listening to this at home or in the audience thinking, yeah, but that's obvious. And actually, like, I agree with you. To me, it feels obvious too, but it's not. Maybe it's just obvious to you because you're an anarchist. I don't think, I think like a lot of people say like, this is just obvious relationship stuff, but no, it's not. It's anarchist way of thinking, because the norm in society, much as I wish it weren't this way, is to choose like to privilege certain people with those things, and to use exception making as proof of love and importance. So I'm going to treat you so differently than anyone else in my life, and that's how you know that you matter. Whereas relationship anarchy says show people that they matter by acting with integrity across all of your relationships and just fundamentally treating them well. Consider them as a person and apply your values in your relationship with them. Treat your commitments to them as important. Things like that, as opposed to saying, I'm going to elevate you by treating you better and by showing you that you're better through treating other people worse, which I do see often happening in relationships. Even, I'm not saying you have to identify with the label of relationship anarchy. And I think there are lots of people who don't treat their friends and partners and family so like intensely differently. But that's what I think it's inviting us to question, that norm.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's also the inverse of that as well, where it's like, I'm going to treat you in this way to show you that you have this status in my
Mm.
life. But there's also the inverse of that, which is the expectation of that in relationships, where people can expect, like, I need you to treat me a certain way, or I need you to give me this much priority over other people because I am your girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, spouse, whatever the relationship is. Like, I deserve, I expect, I am entitled to, the last episode was a lot about entitlement. So, like, I am entitled to this amount of energy, time, priority because I have this either label or status in your life. And if you don't do that, then our relationship isn't real, or you don't care about me, or you don't love me, right? And so this kind of need to prove, or need to have hierarchy, or need to have this type of status in order to prove the relationship or prove you love someone, which I think is really problematic. And that's also like one of the reasons why I really see a lot of value in relationship anarchy, is to question that and dismantle that and be like, okay, what are we actually asking for here? What actually works in relationships? Because, yeah, from my point of view, I'm just like, everyone deserves to be loved and to be treated well. And so, how can we create relationship systems that have people feel that way? And the other thing that keeps getting brought up in the back of my mind, too, is meeting people where they're at. And that's the other thing around not all relationships looking the same, is because not everyone wants the same thing from you, from relationships. And so all your relationships are going to look different in that way, right? I'm just thinking of two of my current life partners, where it's like, if I tried to treat them equally, then that wouldn't be workable for either of those people, because we talk on a different cadence. We talk about different things. We expect different things from one another. We want different things from one another. We're attracted to each other in different ways. We have different histories together, right? Like, and they just, as a human being, they have different wants and needs for relationships. They have what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And so, yeah, just going back to like, it doesn't look the same and it shouldn't look the same. And it would be kind of weird if it did look all of the same, but rather considering yourself, considering the other individual, considering like the relationship structure that you are in, and then, creating. I hate to sound so callous, but like creating workable systems, like that's not very fluffy. I want it to sound softer than that.
I think it sounds fine. I think
Yeah.
also like you're focusing on what works for them, what actually works for you though as well. I think that not making special exceptions for people, and also creating your relationships with them in ways that work for both of you, is a way to protect against resentment down the line. I think when people start to contort themselves and start to try and treat people in absolutely the same way, regardless of context, regardless of the person, regardless of you, only in order to prove this means I love you, I think they often end up feeling trapped, and they often end up feeling owed as well further down the line. Like, I sacrificed myself for you and now you owe me. And that's going to lead to a cycle of entitlement, which what's the word? Deteriorates relationships. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's accurate. Yeah.
I was like, is that how you use that word?
Yeah.
And I think, like bringing in a little bit of transactional analysis, because I do love it. It's very gamey. So games fundamentally are ways that people interact and get things from relationships, either positive or negative, that is not true intimacy, with intimacy being, authentic, without any drama, without playing any roles that aren't real for you. That's what intimacy is. And games is where you think, I have to be this way, or this is the only way to get what I want. And unconsciously you engage in dynamics that actually end up having worse outcomes for both you and the other person. So, for example, if you sacrifice yourself because you think on some level you have to sacrifice yourself for love, because a lot of us have been taught that love means sacrificing yourself. Or you sacrifice yourself because you saw your mum sacrifice herself for your dad, or whatever it is that's going on for you. Eventually, you might feel that your partner is not sacrificing themselves enough for you. And then you get the payoff of saying, but I sacrificed all this for you. If it weren't for you, then I wouldn't be where I am now. And it's actually like, it's not if it weren't for you, it's if it weren't for me. I made that decision to sacrifice myself. That's why it's gamey, because it's deflecting responsibility where it truly isn't warranted. And it's also leading to less intimate, less authentic outcomes in the relationship, if that makes sense, as a very brief introduction to games. So I think having a values-based approach to relationships, and as this point in the manifesto says, applying it across the board and not making special rules or exceptions is a way to protect yourself against resentment and self-betrayal in relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Well, and I know that we're coming up to time here. So, any closing or concluding things that you want to say about this bullet point?
I don't think I have any big points to make. I mean, I wrote down some reflection questions, which might be useful to just drop in at this point, like which relationships get the best out of me and which get what's left over. Because I think that's a lot of how, like, very often people approach their relationships, that they give their best to one or maybe a couple and then the others just get the dregs. So question whether that's happening in your life and whether that's working for you, working for the people in your life. Would you want to change it? Let's see what else. Nah, that's fine. I think I'm done. I'd rather go to questions but obviously after you've shared any last thoughts you have.
I think that we covered a lot. I always get to this point in the recording and just being like, wow, yeah, we could just keep talking and talking about this. There's so much that we could say. And there's also so many angles that we can come from. That's what I'm thinking about as we're talking about this, thinking about all the different perspectives that you could look at this bullet point through. And it's just a lot. But I think that we covered a good amount, and I am curious to see what questions people have. So we're going to open it up for our Q&A portion. Thank you all so much for listening in. If you want to, you can either unmute yourself, you could come on video. If you want to ask a question or give a comment, you can also put it in the chat if you'd like. Or if you want to remain even more anonymous, you could also send one of us a private message. So, opening it up. What questions, what comments do you have? We'd love to hear from you.
Hi, it's Christina. So first, thank you guys for the way you went about the question. I wanted to find out how, or maybe just to hear from you, how would one see, I'm aware about relationship anarchy and I want to get there, but I find that in relationships, it's easier for me to compare. And I think that's what you're saying about scarcity-based values, where I'm looking like this other person doesn't give you this, so therefore I'm better. And I know I'm doing it, and I know I don't want to be doing it, but I don't know how to not, because I've been in a lot of dynamics where there was almost competition baked in, and I'm trying not to do that anymore. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that question. So I can definitely resonate with that feeling. So I don't want you to leave this space thinking that you're doing something terribly bad by having those thoughts and those feelings, because I've definitely had that in my life, and not even that long ago. Like, I think thoughts and feelings are free, right? We're allowed to have thoughts and feelings. It's how they actually impact our actions and our relationships that counts. And I've had that kind of thought of, I feel special to this person because I know I have this kind of relationship with them, and they don't have that with a lot of other people, or maybe they don't have it with anyone, or I know I feel special because they talk to me about that thing and not to other people. And I think that, you can tell me if you disagree, Elizabeth, but for me, that feeling, that thought is not a bad one. If I examine it, where is it coming from? A desire to feel important, a desire to feel like I'm a good confidant to people, that people trust me, that people want to be close to me. All of those things matter to me because of the life that I have had. And Christina, you might resonate with some of that too. You might think about where it comes from for you, the desire to feel special in some ways. And wanting to feel special is not in and of itself pathological. I think we all have a desire to feel special to people. It would only become a problem, in my view, if, for example, the person in my life then developed another close relationship and I started to treat them badly because of it. Oh, I'm resentful that you actually have someone else that you trust now and not just me. I actually wish for that person to have more people in their life that they trust and they can go to. And it might be hard if they meet someone else that they feel sort of as safe with on the same level as they do with me. It might be emotionally complex, but I'm not going to allow it to make me treat them poorly or lash out at them. It will just be an opportunity, I think, for me to examine, why is this painful for me? What is it that I'm needing from that person to feel reassured, if anything? Or is it something I need from myself? Is it work I need to do? So yeah, I'd separate thoughts and feelings from actions and impact, and normalize the idea that wanting to feel special and unique is just a human thing. And it's an opportunity to reflect, if I can summarize everything that I've just said there. But yeah, I'm open to you having a different perspective on this as well, Elizabeth. What do you think?
Well, I guess I'm curious, Christina, what you got out of what Rose shared, because I would hate to repeat anything.
Oh,
Yeah,
no, it was absolutely relevant. In fact, some of the examples you gave, oh, this person shared this with me and not with the other person, so I must be special in this different way. I was just like, that's a bit close. So I'm just to answer you, Elizabeth, I think a lot of what Rose shared resonated, because I feel like if you want to, I'm struggling with separating equal and fair and equity a lot in relationship anarchy. And so when the thoughts of specialness are there, the reflection is not as much on what could this mean and more, don't do that. This is not what relationship anarchy is.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think that's a common pitfall that, I mean, we all fall into as well, is to look at the principles of relationship anarchy and then judge ourselves based off of how we think we're adhering to them and how we're not adhering to them, versus examining what works for us and what doesn't work for us, right? And so what I hear you say, Christina, is like just that ability to kind of stop and get curious and be like, why am I feeling this way? Does this actually mean that this is a bad situation, or that this person is more special or less special, or, something like that? But just being able to be like, how am I feeling right now? And what do I need around that? You know?
Thanks for answering that like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sometimes, especially in, it's so beautiful that inside of like non-monogamous, polyamorous, relationship anarchist spaces, that we're having these conversations. It's so wonderful. It's so beautiful. Obviously, I love it, or I wouldn't be doing this. And when we talk about theory, we have to remember that we also have to talk about practice and how that actually works with human beings. And then we hopefully get this wonderful marriage of praxis, right? And I, for one, am definitely more someone, when we're talking about the humanness of things, to focus more on the practice of something rather than the theory of it. So in practice, how am I feeling? What's working for me here? Why is it working? Why is it not working? And being very curious and compassionate with yourself and others. And then once you've had that conversation, then maybe going back to the theory and being like, okay, how did that work? How did that not work? Getting curious about the theory itself, right? Because this is not the word of God. Andie Nordgren has even come out and been like, I don't even agree with all the things that I said. Because he wrote it, in 2012, right? And
I
so
don't actually know the pronouns of Andie Nordgren, by the way.
Oh,
May not be he, but yeah.
my
Sorry to
bad.
interrupt.
I also don't know that was an assumption on my part. Yeah, Andie Nordgren, we will refer to them as they, since we don't know their pronouns. But yeah, so they don't even agree with everything that they wrote. So really just like, using this as like a living, breathing examination rather than like something to get right. Oh, I think Andie Nordgren uses she, they pronouns.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, no, I apologize, Andie Nordgren, for misgendering you.
And the English language way sounds like it's more often a he name, so it's an understandable mistake, and we've corrected it as soon as we were able to. Yeah, we don't want to go from one form of dogma to another, the dogma of mononormative couple-centric society to the dogma of this is how relationship anarchy is done, and if you don't do it, you've failed as a human being. That's
Right.
not human, it's not relational, it's not feasible and reasonable. Really appreciate your question, Christina. Thanks for being brave enough to unmute and speak to us. Has anyone else got any questions for us, either aloud or written down? Here we go. How would one initiate a conversation with a partner about self-sacrifice tendencies? Can I clarify with you whether you're asking about self-sacrifice in yourself or in your partner? And if you can give any other detail about that, would be really helpful. I mean, we can give a basic answer to that, but in order to be truly helpful, a little bit more detail would really help, if you don't mind, obviously without sharing anything that feels too personal. And feel free to DM me if you would like to. I can change details as necessary in myself, but also in my partner. Okay, got a bunch of lovely people pleasers on our hands. So I think we all have a tendency to do it in some situations. So yeah, that said, with no malice whatsoever. I mean, Elizabeth, do you have thoughts to share first? I want to give you space to speak rather than always going first.
No, you're all good. I feel like we have a good flow, you know?
Give or
Yeah,
take.
no. Yeah, and also to just say, I often refer to myself as a recovering people pleaser. Definitely have sacrificed in relationships before. And so, how would one initiate a conversation with a partner about self-sacrifice tendencies? My go-to, without knowing more details of the situation, would be to start with you and to start with how you feel and your own experience and where you see that you've been self-sacrificing. So what that might sound like is, hey, I want to talk to you about something, and I've just noticed that either in general or in this specific situation that I've been operating from a place of self-sacrifice. I notice in myself that I've been thinking these things and feeling these things, but acting in this way. Right. So it's almost like a narration of what you have been doing. Right. So I think I've been operating from a place of self sacrifice. This is what I've been thinking. This is what I've been feeling. This is what I've been doing. And then this is how I'd rather be. Right. This is how I'd rather it go. And maybe you don't know that yet. Maybe you don't have like a solid answer to that. And that's okay. It could be as simple as, I don't want to do that anymore, but I don't really know what else to do because these reasons, because I am thinking this way, because I do want to please you, because I don't want to upset you, because whatever the reason is why you're acting that way, it's like, I don't want to do that anymore. And part of what you want, what the, vision is for the future is why you want that for yourself, but also why you want that in the relationship. It's like, I don't want to act from that place anymore because it doesn't feel good for me. And I also don't want to act that way anymore because I don't think that it's fair to the relationship either. I don't want to be a part of a relationship where people are sacrificing. I'd rather operate from a different spot. And then giving them the opportunity and being like, how do you feel about that? What comes up for you when I'm sharing that? And so that gives them the opportunity to acknowledge what it is that you've said and then share their feelings about that. And then maybe because you opened up and you were that vulnerable, maybe they'll say something like, I've been doing that too. I kind of see myself in that as well. I think we both been doing that. And that is not like a guaranteed response, right? But that often does happen when we open up that vulnerably, is that the other person is like, wow, I think I've been doing that too, right? And so then going from there. So to recap, what the framework of that is stating what your intention is for the conversation. I want to talk about self-sacrifice, stating what that is for you. So thoughts, feelings, actions, stating why you want to, be a different way and what that different way is, even if it's just, I want to have more peace in the relationship. We keep bringing up peace. I have this vision for the relationship. I'd like to do it this way, right? Instead. So that's the framework of that type of conversation, Ro, do you have anything that you'd like to share or add?
I love your framework, and I think it does kind of reflect one of the frameworks we teach in our program. Another one that I think also came up in the program, but I also use is I see, I feel, I need. So what are you noticing? What is the problem that you're observing? How is it feeling for you? And the way I'd map what you said onto that is like, what are the fears you have coming up around it? What's the difficulty of it in this moment? And then I need is like, this is what I would like to be different. Or even I need to just talk to you about this. That can be the first point. So nothing much more to add on that. But I think what Elizabeth said is great. And I give you permission to speak for both of us on that. We do have one more anonymous question. So I'll tell you the question, and then we can always like decide not to go into it. Apologies to the question asker. So the question is, how do you identify if your values don't align, or whether it's a question of finding out what the definitions are and create a common ground? So I think that's referring to what you were saying about like the fact that we can have the same words, but they don't mean the same thing to us. I'm going to try and guess what I think you would say, and then you tell me if I'm correct. Because I've heard you coach enough times over the last few years. I think I'm going to paraphrase it just because we're short on time, but I think you might say something like, if I were to follow you around with a camera, how would I see you living out those values? What would I notice? What would you be saying and doing? What would your posture be like? How would you feel inside? If I could go into your brain and there could be a narrator that says what you're thinking, what would that be like? So your laugh tells me that I'm not far off.
I didn't even know how wonderful that would be. That was so great. That was awesome.
I'm saying it because I think it's a very good way of asking people questions. I'm not just like making fun of you. I am sort of teasing you that I kind of know you very well and the things that you say, but it's because I've learned something good from it, and that's why I've retained it. That it's a really good way of thinking about things. So to answer this person, ask the person in front of you that question. When you say, for example, autonomy, what does that look like in your life? If I were to follow you around with a camera and make a documentary about you and autonomy, what would I be seeing? What would I be noticing? What would I be looking out for? But yeah, do you want to add anything, Elizabeth?
No, that's brilliant. Because what you're looking for is the overlap, right? Like you're looking for the Venn diagram, like what is in that center here. And a way that you can do that is by looking at what it looks like in your life, by asking those questions. So yeah, brilliant. I love it. That just made me so happy.
I've been listening. Well, that's the end of today's podcast and Q&A section. Thank you so much for being here, for your questions, for your attention, for your interest. And take care and have a good day.
Yeah, just echoing what Rose said, just so lovely to have you here. Hopefully we see you at future recordings.
We hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you want to get in touch with us, go to the podcast description. You can share your feedback, suggest themes for future series, and find ways to work with us.
If you liked this, leave us a 5-star review with a comment. It really helps our sweet little baby of a podcast grow.
And if you didn't like it, maybe don't leave a review. Just go complain to a friend.
Thanks so much for listening.
All the love.